Leela sobbed quietly as she married an elderly man on their first night as husband and wife. He excused himself to the bathroom, and when he emerged, her face went pale. But before I go on, drop a comment below and let me know what city you're watching this from. I hope you enjoy the story. Leela grew up in a small rural town. Her family, her father James, her mother Maria, and her younger brother, Ethan, struggled daily to make ends meet. James, with his rough, work-worn hands, fixed fences for neighbors or helped out at local farms whenever he could. Maria spent her evenings hunched over an old sewing machine, stitching under the dim glow of a single bulb. Their earnings barely covered bread, potatoes, and on special occasions, a small piece of meat. Leela, the eldest, knew hunger from a young age. At 16, she began skipping meals, claiming she wasn't hungry, so Ethan, thin and often sick, could have her share. She'd sit by the window in the afternoons, gazing at the shadowy outlines of the hills, dreaming of a day when her family wouldn't have to pinch pennies. Jobs in their town were scarce. Young people left for the city, and those who stayed clung to any chance to survive. Leela and Ethan tried to find work, but their efforts were met with cold indifference. James often said, "We'll get by as long as we stick together." But Leela saw the toll the years took on her father's slouched shoulders and the fading light in her mother's eyes. She knew that without change, their lives would remain a relentless cycle of hardship. Despite their struggles, James and Maria believed in the power of education. "Study, kids," they urged. "It's your ticket to a better life." Leela held onto those words like a lifeline. She was a dedicated student, and her hard work paid off when her school secured her a full scholarship to a city university. Leaving home, Leela felt a spark of hope for the first time. The university was a new world, lectures, books, bustling hallways. She studied business, dreaming of one day starting her own company and pulling her family out of debt. But reality was harsh. After graduation, the city's best jobs were already taken, with connections and wealth outweighing her degree. Defeated, Leela returned home with her suitcase and shattered dreams, taking a job as a cashier in a small store. Day after day, she stood behind the counter, offering smiles to the few customers and counting change, her ambitions deferred once more. Ethan, too, struggled. After high school with no college education, he could only find odd jobs, hauling crates or shoveling snow. Their family's history of poverty cast a shadow, scaring off anyone who might offer them a chance. Leela's heart ached watching Ethan clench his fists in frustration after another rejection. Leela was striking, with long auburn hair and gentle hazel eyes that radiated kindness. But her beauty didn't help in love. The men in town looked at her with pity or disinterest. "Who'd marry a girl with no dowry?" the neighbors whispered. Leela longed for a family, a warm home free of fear for tomorrow, but every time someone showed interest, the talk soon turned to her family's poverty. One day, a young man from a nearby town, Daniel, asked her to take a walk. They chatted about small things, laughed, and for a moment, Leela thought it might be the start of something real. But within a week, he was gone. She later heard from his cousin that he'd said he couldn't carry that burden. The words cut deep. Leela went home, locked herself in her room, and cried herself to sleep. Ethan faced similar rejection. Girls turned him away once they learned he came from the ramshackle house at the edge of town. Late at night, Leela and Ethan would sit on the porch, staring at the stars, sharing their pain. "We're not less than anyone else," Ethan would say, squeezing her hand. "We just haven't caught a break." Leela nodded, but deep down, she felt loneliness settling in like an old friend. Then, one day, an older man named Henry started coming to the store. He was in his 60s, with snow-white hair and deep lines etched into his face. He bought bread, cheese, or milk, always leaving generous tips. His sharp, warm eyes studied Leela in a way she couldn't quite understand. She grew used to him as a regular, until one day he lingered at the counter. "Leela," he said in a low, steady voice, "I'd like to talk to you, not here. May I visit your home tomorrow?" Taken aback, she nodded. The next day, Henry arrived with a basket of food, fresh meat, fruit, pastries, things Leela hadn't seen in months. James and Maria welcomed him warily, but he was humble and respectful. Sitting at their wobbly kitchen table, he made an offer that left Leela speechless. I want you to be my wife. I'm not young, but I have means. I'll take care of you and your family. You'll never want for anything again." His words hung in the air. Leela stared, unsure how to respond. Henry added that he didn't need an answer right away and left, leaving the basket behind. That night, Leela lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with his proposal. She was 25, he was well over 60. She didn't love him, she barely knew him. But his promise to save her family echoed in her mind. She thought of her mother selling her earrings to buy medicine for Ethan, her father coming home empty-handed after being cheated by a boss, and Ethan, who deserved better. Marrying Henry wasn't about love, it was a sacrifice, but it was for them. The next morning, Leela found her mother hanging laundry in the yard. "Mom, what should I do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Maria looked at her for a long moment. "It's your choice, Leela, but no, we don't want you to be unhappy." Leela nodded, but she'd already made up her mind. She gathered her parents and Ethan at the table. "I'm going to marry Henry," she said softly. James frowned, Maria gripped her hand, and Ethan stood abruptly. "You can't, he's old." Leela shook her head. "He's kind and he's promised to help us. I'll manage." Her parents tried to talk her out of it, but Leela was resolute. "You've done so much for me. Now it's my turn." James sighed, and Maria hugged her, whispering, "We're always with you." Leela vowed to endure it all for their sake, feeling less like a young woman and more like a warrior heading into battle. Days later, Henry returned. Leela wore her best dress, simple but clean, trembling as she opened the door. His warm smile eased her fear slightly. He greeted James and Maria, shook Ethan's hand, and turned to Leela. "I'm glad you've agreed. May I ask for your hand officially?" he said, kneeling. Blushing, Leela nodded as her parents stood frozen. Henry slipped a plain silver ring onto her finger. Through his calm demeanor, Leela sensed kindness, giving her a flicker of hope that it might not be as bad as she feared. After the engagement, they spent more time together. Henry brought gifts, a new blanket, books for Ethan, a coat for James. He shared stories of his life, how he'd lost his wife years ago and built a business in the city. His voice was deep but gentle, carrying the weight of experience. Leela opened up too, sharing her dreams, her love of learning, and her devotion to her family. Henry listened intently, nodding or asking questions with genuine curiosity. "You're strong, Leela," he said once. "Not many could bear what you have." His words touched her, and she began to see him not just as an old man, but as someone she might trust. The wedding was set for a month later. Maria and the neighbors helped Leela prepare, stitching a dress from old tulle adorned with lace. Leela tried it on in front of the mirror, but each time she felt like a stranger stared back. She wanted to be a joyful bride, but her heart told her this wasn't her story. The age gap, his wealth, her sacrifice, it all weighed heavily. Henry sent money for food and flowers for the house, but Leela couldn't shake her doubts. "What if I can't do this?" she wondered, staring out the window. But thoughts of her family steeled her resolve. On the wedding day, Leela stood before the mirror in her white dress, hair pinned up, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. Maria came up behind her and hugged her. "You're strong, Leela. Don't forget that." Leela nodded, but tears streamed down her face. The ceremony took place in the town's small church. Henry, in a pristine suit, his silver hair gleaming under candlelight, looked at her with warmth. Leela gave her consent in a trembling voice, and he placed a gold ring on her finger. She cried as they wed, unable to hold back the mix of fear, hope, and sorrow. Guests thought it was joy, but Leela knew the truth. After the wedding, Henry took her to his city mansion, with high ceilings, marble floors, and servants who bowed as she passed. Leela felt out of place, her worn shoes absurd amid the opulence. Henry noticed her unease and took her hand. "Give it time," he said gently. That evening, exhausted by the day's emotions, Leela asked to retire to her room. She collapsed onto the bed, finally letting herself relax, but sleep wouldn't come. She thought of all she'd left behind and what lay ahead. Suddenly, a strange sound snapped her out of her thoughts, a low, steady hum of water from the bathroom across the hall. Leela sat up, heart quickening. The noise was soft but persistent, like a stream, amplified by the quiet of the vast house. What if something's happened to Henry, she thought. He wasn't young, his slow steps, his white hair. Maybe he needed help. Pushing aside her hesitation, Leela got up, slipped a robe over her nightgown, and padded barefoot to the bathroom door. The hallway was dim, with only a sliver of light under the door. Her hand trembled near the knob. She felt like a stranger in this house, this life, but concern outweighed her discomfort. "Henry," she whispered, barely breaking the silence. No answer, just the sound of water growing louder, as if the faucet had been turned up. Leela swallowed, hesitated, then knocked softly. The door swung open and a figure stood before her. Leela stepped back, her breath catching. It wasn't the Henry she knew. A tall man stood there, his thick hair falling over his brow, his eyes bright and intense, reflecting the bathroom's light. His skin was smooth, his posture strong, like someone in their prime. He smiled softly, disarming her. Leela's legs buckled. She froze, her mind refusing to process what she saw. It was Henry, yet it wasn't. The eyes, the voice, even the slight dimple in his chin were the same, but without the weight of years. Her heart pounded as she clutched her chest. "Who are you?" she managed to murmur, her voice barely audible. "Leela, don't be afraid," he said, stepping forward. His voice was the same, deep, warm, but now vibrant with energy. Leela shook her head, backing into the wall, the cold plaster seeping through her robe. "No," she whispered, her eyes searching his face for answers. This couldn't be real. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move, her voice stuck in her throat. Henry raised his hands, palms out, as if calming a startled animal. "Please, let me explain," he said, his tone pleading. He stepped closer, and though Leela pressed harder against the wall, she couldn't look away. His young hands, straight shoulders, and that smile, kind yet almost playful, held her gaze. "Sit down, Leela," he said, gesturing to a couch in the hall's nearby sitting area. "I'll tell you everything." She didn't move until he backed off, giving her space. Mustering her strength, Leela stepped away from the wall and followed, her legs shaking, each step echoing in her mind like a hammer's strike. She sat on the edge of the couch, fists clenched in her lap to stop the trembling. Henry sat across from her, keeping his distance, and began to speak. "I'm not who you think I am," he said, looking her in the eyes. "I used makeup, a wig, and loose clothes to look older. My grandfather, a wealthy man who passed away last year, left me an inheritance with a condition." Leela stared, her world unraveling. "Not just the money," he continued, "but a request. He wanted me to find a worthy wife. He met you at the store where you helped him with his bags without knowing who he was. You smiled, wished him a good day. He saw something in you and asked me to find out who you really were." His words hit like stones in a still pond, shattering her understanding. Makeup, a wig, a test. It felt like a ridiculous fairy tale, a dream she couldn't wake from. She searched his face for a lie, but found only truth in his eyes, those same eyes she'd thought were tired and old. "I wanted to know if you'd marry me for money," Henry said, his voice breaking. "Or if there was more to you. And I saw it, Leela. You chose this not for yourself, but for them, because you'd give up everything for your family. That's rare, and I couldn't ignore it." Leela's mind swirled with emotions. She remembered her tears at the wedding, her fear of the wedding night, her choice to sacrifice for her parents and Ethan. Now this man, not old but young, said it had all been a test. Her world was crumbling, and she didn't know whether to feel betrayed or freed. "You lied," she said at last, her voice cracking as tears spilled over. "You made me think I was marrying an old man, giving up my life. Why? To prove I'm good." Henry lowered his head, pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to know you truly, and I saw more than I expected." Leela covered her face, sobbing, her chest aching, her breaths labored. She didn't know if she was broken by anger or relieved. But one thing was clear. The man before her wasn't the husband she'd thought she'd accepted, and that was both terrifying and strangely captivating. Henry kept talking, his voice calm but full of feeling. "My grandfather couldn't stop talking about you. He said that small moment, helping him with his bags, not knowing he was wealthy, showed a rare, pure heart. He asked me to find you, to make sure you were that person. And I did." Leela watched, tears still in her eyes, as he wiped away the last traces of fake gray hair and makeup. Before her was a man in his early 30s, handsome, with strong features and eyes burning with sincerity. I fell in love with you, Leela, not your choice but your soul. Forgive my deception. I'm only asking for a chance to be with you, for real. Leela sat in silence, trying to process it all. She felt anger, yes, but also something else, a honesty in his words that disarmed her. Her sacrifice, which she'd thought was an end, had become a kind of miracle. Still, it was hard to grasp. Henry reached out his hand, and after a long pause, Leela placed hers in his. They embraced, and she felt the tension begin to fade. He wasn't an old man she had to care for, but a man who saw more in her than anyone ever had. Their feelings grew slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. For the first time, they had a chance to build something real. The next morning dawned quietly, as if the world itself held its breath at the turn of their story. A soft sun filtered through gray clouds, bathing the house in gentle light. Leela stood by her bedroom window, watching the dew on the grass, trying to sort through her racing thoughts. Last night had changed everything. Henry, whom she'd thought elderly, was young. Her marriage, a test. She felt betrayal, peace, and a tentative hope. But one thing was certain. She needed to go home, to her real home, to her family, to tell the truth. "We have to go," she told Henry over breakfast, gripping her tea mug so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I need to tell them everything." Henry nodded, his face serious, his eyes tinged with worry. "I'm ready, Leela, I'll explain it all." He offered his hand, but she didn't take it, not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure she could fully trust again yet. The drive to her town felt endless. Henry's car glided over the bumpy rural roads as Leela stared out the window, recognizing every field, every crooked fence, every wind-bent tree. The knot in her throat tightened, and she fidgeted with her scarf until it was a crumpled mess. When they pulled up to the old house, her heart clenched. The peeling paint, creaky porch, and cracked walls were her world, her pain, her refuge, her love. James sat on his usual bench, mending a fishing rod, while Maria tended the garden. Seeing the car, their faces lit up. Their daughter was home. Leela got out first, running to her mother, breathing in the scent of earth and fresh bread. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, "I have to tell you something." James approached, wrapping her in a strong hug, his rough hands trembling. Henry stepped out of the car, holding a small bag, standing a few feet away, waiting. Leela nodded slightly, giving him permission to approach. "James, Maria," he began, his voice steady but earnest, "I have something to show you." Before their eyes, he removed the last traces of his disguise, faint makeup on his temples, a subtle prosthetic. The gray hair vanished, the wrinkles faded, revealing a young man with dark hair and a determined gaze. James dropped his fishing rod, Maria covered her mouth, and Ethan, who'd come to the doorway, froze, eyes wide. "It's me," Henry said, bowing his head humbly. "I pretended to be older. My grandfather, a wealthy man who died last year, left me his fortune and a request: find a worthy wife. He met Leela at the store and asked me to see if she was who he thought. I wanted to know if she'd marry me for money or for her family's sake. I saw she chose her family. That's why I fell in love." Silence blanketed the yard. Leela watched her parents, waiting for their reaction. James cleared his throat, his weak lungs betraying him with a wheeze, and stepped toward Henry. "You lied to us all," he said sternly, but his eyes held understanding. "Why, to find the truth," Henry replied, meeting his gaze. "And to give you what you deserve. I promise to care for Leela and all of you always." Maria broke down, wiping tears with her apron. "Is it true, Leela? Are you happy with him?" Leela nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know, Mom, but now I believe him." Ethan approached last, studying Henry before offering his hand. "You're a trickster," he said with a half-smile, part amazement, part respect. "Welcome to the family." Henry shook his hand, and that gesture bridged their past and what they could become. Her parents were stunned but moved by Henry's sincerity, his promises, and his humility. They invited him inside, and at that unsteady table, where food had once been scarce, a long conversation began, filled with questions, tears, and tentative smiles. A week passed, but for Leela, each day felt like a new chapter in a book she'd just started. Henry didn't waste time proving his words weren't empty. One morning, as they ate breakfast in the town, he said with a cryptic smile, "I want to go back to your family's home. I have something for them." Leela's heart skipped, hope and nerves flickering in her eyes. They drove back, the familiar bumpy roads stretching out, but the air felt lighter. When they arrived, a truck was parked outside the old house, workers unloading furniture. James and Maria stepped onto the porch, confused as Ethan ran up, questions in his eyes. Henry took Leela's hand and led her toward them. "This is your new home," he said, pointing to a cozy cottage across the road. Leela froze, unable to process it. The house was modest but lovely, white walls, a front garden with fresh flowers, gleaming windows, and smoke curling from the chimney. Maria clutched her chest. James coughed to hide his emotion, and Ethan let out a low whistle, incredulous. "That's not all," Henry added, turning to James. "I've arranged for doctors in the city to treat your lungs. It's all covered. You're going to heal." Leela looked at her father, and for the first time in years, she didn't hear his raspy cough, just saw him stand still, speechless. Maria sobbed and hugged Henry like a son. "Thank you," she said through tears, "for our girl, for us." They stepped into the new home, the smell of fresh paint and new wood filling the air. A kettle hummed in the kitchen, courtesy of a worker. Leela wandered the rooms, touching the walls, brushing the window frames, unable to believe it was real. James sank into a new armchair, Maria fussed with the curtains, and Ethan explored his room with a wide grin. For the first time, her family had a chance, a new life. That evening, Leela stood with Henry on the cottage's porch as the sun set, painting the sky in gold and pink. The breeze played with her hair. She looked at him, his young face, his calm expression, and thought of their wild story. "I made a choice without knowing the whole truth," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "I thought I was sacrificing myself, but it led me to you." Henry smiled, pulling her close. "You're not a victim, Leela, you're strength, and I'm grateful I found you." They became a family, not perfect, but real. Their path had mistakes, tears, and lies, but also understanding, redemption, and love. Leela learned her story was a lesson. Kindness, even as small as helping a stranger with his bags, always finds a way to return. Standing beside Henry, she knew their journey was just beginning.